Okay, hello everyone. So I'll just do a quick kind of overview and a quick walkthrough. And now, if there's any questions, I guess, you can ask me or Scott about this. So yeah, the map. So what initially, well, what the kind of the view I had was, what do we want to do with this map? Is I guess the map is something that you want to use to navigate to see where we're going, right? But we also want to use the map to see where we are, relative to where we're going. And hopefully, we can use this for that too. And so, but in order to do that, we have to define what dimensions are, those 3 dimensions that you see. How I see it and how it's defined is, I can explain in one way where what can we be conscious of in each dimension? So what can we visibly see or be with in each dimension? So first dimension will be things that we see or we can become conscious of by not prompting or just meditating or just being in everyday awareness or everyday life, really, like shadows or triggers or addictions and compulsions. You can notice and make those things conscious without prompting or inquiring into anything, right? So it's naturally arising. So we can rest as awareness and do all those techniques to really kind of see all that, make it more conscious in that way. And that kind of defines dimensions, what we actually, what can we make conscious in those dimensions? So if it's second dimension, it'd be, we'll be inquiring into things and we'll be prompting our sensations or programs. Then we get to really see what's the unconscious landings of it, which is we can make visible and be conscious of. But we can't be conscious of the third dimension conscious until we go to the third dimension. So that's how I view how do I define each dimension, is to show what can we see in those dimensions and what can we be made conscious of them. And on the right hand side is what tools and practices is kind of applicable and used and useful in those dimensions. So that's on the right hand side. And what I also wanted to show was the fact that, yes, we have these dimensions and then we have our programs and stories and like mechanism and programs, right? So, but I wanted to show that there's this thing runs through all the way through first, second, and third that is connected. And that's the middle red thing, like a tree looking thing, to show that all of these are connected to a point, to the initial need for safety programs, basically, if you really want to break it down to. And this is still a pointing, so it's not like a definite answer to everything thing, but it's the clearest we have ever been to be able to show the need for safety program, basically. And and it's basically, there's an underlying fear that runs through all of them. Yes, we might be repressing anger, but we also are afraid of showing the anger as well. So it comes from the need to feel safe. So I must not show my anger, express my anger, right? And that turns into, in second dimension, that will turn into identities or deficiency stories, because it's safer to believe that than to feel that and to acknowledge the fact that you're repressing or have to feel these emotions that you never wanted to feel again, I guess, for myself anyway. And then when that becomes more unconscious, then we start seeing the surface stuff like shadows, first dimension stuff, what we really see without prompting, the conscious landing, as we call it. So I put visible and conscious landing in the first dimension because we can see them and we can be conscious of them in our everyday life or when we meditate without prompting or going deeper into it, really. From the second and third dimension, they're both unconscious. So I call it unconscious because we have to kind of actually do practices or use tools to get those things out. So that's the underlying need for safety program that runs through all those dimensions that I wanted to show. And I kind of already said this, but I also wanted to show the practices and tools that applies to each of those dimensions that really make sense. And how we see how we come across them, but how it can also become a landing too. If you look at the top, bottom right corner, it says any of the practices and tools can also become a landing too, especially in first and second dimensions, because we can easily land on these practices on the right hand side to just stay there and not go deeper into the deeper tools, because it might feel safer, or I don't know, if there's if there's a safety in that, we can grab anything, right? We can grab anything to feel safe, or to bypass, or to blind ourselves, or to kind of shut ourselves out from it. So those things can be a landing too. And yeah. And there was so many things we kind of brainstormed, with me, Scott, Dan, and some of the trainers as well. We were just, there's so many things we wanted to put on there, but I also wanted to be clear, and I didn't want to flood. It already looks quite busy to some people's eyes as well. But the core kind of thing that is already in there, I find that the need for safety programs that runs all the way through, and how we see those things in each dimensions. And we are also compiling like an example map where, we'll have an example of those stories basically. So it could be anger, repression on the third dimension, and then I might have I'm unlovable, I'm not good enough, I'm fake or something, the deficiency stories. And then in the first dimension, you might see that as shadows. I hate people that's showing anger in public, or I get triggered by people who's really confident or something like that. I might have addiction to alcohol or weed or something like that, or porn or something, to push something that I don't want to feel down. So but they're all connected if you look at this map, right? And that's how useful it could be. So I hope I'm making sense. And yeah, if there's any questions, or if you want to take over, Scott, and add anything or correct anything that I might have said. But yeah.
I mean, it's all perfectly clear to me. I'll just go dive into a few more details here. Somebody mentioned that, what about shadows in second and third dimension? So the way I see this, I'll see if Toshi agrees. These are the things right here. Look at the fear. The red is the fear and the need for safety running through all the dimensions. So many of us are coming into KI with still shadows. We're doing second dimension work, still seeing shadows or chronic pain or triggers. And somebody asked, well, what about the shadows in second dimension? I would say that all of this could run all the way into third dimension. Like, you could still have shadows in third dimension work, which you would want to clean up. But so I think that's why I'm encouraging shadow work from the beginning, because you can carry those through the dimensions. But you can carry chronic pain, unresolved chronic pain through the dimensions. Addictions, people are carrying those through, wondering why they're not resolving in second dimension, because you're not going here enough, I think, is the reason. So that's what I wanted to make the point, that these landing places are not necessarily, if Toshi sees it that way, like the ones in landing in first dimension also can be brought into second dimension and so forth.
Yeah. I thought about this as well, like, should shadows be in second dimension? So if you notice, the shadow work itself is in second dimension, because we actually inquire into our thought systems and programs, but the shadow itself only appears in first dimension, right? Because you can notice them when you meditate. Yeah. You're triggered. You don't like those people, right? So the shadow will appear in first dimension.
Yeah.
It's not unconscious. It's still, you can still, maybe to some people it is, but the work is, the shadow work itself is definitely second dimension.
Yeah.
But the shadow itself is like thoughts and triggers, right? So you can notice them, but you might not know if it's a shadow or not, but it's definitely appearing in first dimension. That's why I wanted to keep it there, to make it clear.
That makes sense. Yeah. Because shadow work, you say, is a prompt. We're prompting things up, I think, is what I'm saying. So shadow work would be your prompting. So that's second dimension. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. So yeah, I don't think there's a lot to say about this. I think most of the people here in third dimension kind of know, like in first dimension, the limitations of it. But the only thing I would say is that I think that even though we might see addictions or shadows, what Toshi's saying is that we don't necessarily see the programming that's buried, the trauma and repression. So we might see the shadow come up, but then there's nothing we can do with it, or, until we start doing second or third dimension, because it's so deeply rooted in the body. A lot of this stuff is like, well, we might see pain. We're visibly aware of pain, but that doesn't tell us about the repression or trauma in it. And that's the thing I wanted to make a point of. We see these things, but that doesn't mean that we're being able to resolve them in first dimension just because we see them. Okay. So, and I love how he did this. The things above in first dimension are simply safer than, because someone said, well, it's not safe. None of it's really safe. No, it's just safer than, in a way. And if you could just feel into this, it's simply safer to shadow my stuff out to somebody else than it is to feel that I have that. That's safer. And it's also safer to be triggered into an unlovable story if it means that I won't have to feel the anger that's repressed. That's safer than the repression. And so it's like turtles all the way down. It's safer. It's safety all the way down. If you can really hear that, you're in the groove in KI right there. And if you're not, it'll be a struggle, because here's the other thing I'm going to start saying, like, we can, this might touch people the wrong way, so I'm going to be very sensitive the way I say it. But when we're not aware of our need for safety, other stories and programs come up from our resistance, which bamboozle us into thinking that we're not seeking safety. And so that's when we'll attack others from our trauma, or we'll make a bunch of problems because we're seeking safety, but we're not aware of it. So what we're going to do as trainers, for example, and trainees, come back to say, I understand that there's a lot of energy there. We have to understand also you're seeking safety. That's what we might need to do, is seek some safety with this big energy. But if we keep doing it, then you're not going to open up to that repression. So if we keep letting your resistance win here, then you see we're not going to be able to help you. So we're going to talk about your resistance in terms of safety, I think, in the future, not as a judgment, but I think is a right view. You know, like, this is really what it is. And if we can just talk about it that way, maybe some of us won't stay in those places very long where we're really resistant if we understand that we're seeking safety, and that's just what we do. Okay. Second dimension, again, are safer, because somebody said, well, it doesn't feel safe to investigate unlovable. Right, but it's safer than investigating the repression of rage underneath it, or hurt. And that's all we're saying, is it's safer than. This is where a lot of people here are, I think, that come to KI, because we're pretty sophisticated here in terms of understanding these practices, a lot of us, and methods, but a lot of us do get stuck here in second dimension. And so I do want to talk to anybody here who still feels like they're trying to understand, how much do I look at identity versus repression or trauma? And that's where the safety thing is going to kick in again. And you might lean towards, again, identity, and maybe even bump heads with me a little bit around that. But just understand, I'm going to come back to you and say, but is it safer? See? And if you can determine that, yeah, it's safer, then we want to go to the repression. We're going to go third dimension. If something is just safer, even if it feels good, see, because non-dual feels good, feels complete. You can have a deep state of realization in first and second dimension and still be bypassing that. So there's all sorts, and so here's the other thing I would say, the defaulting that I'm seeing, that I've reported to you guys in session, a lot of it happens here. Well, it all tends to happen in first and second dimension, but basically we get close to the primary repression right there. And instead of being able to go there, the system says, no, goes for safety. Here comes victim identity right there. Or here comes hurt. That's safer than rage, if rage is a primary. Or here comes non-dual, insight or thought, at about the same time that we're hitting the primary repression, safer. Or here's dissociation or shutdown in the moment of getting close to the primary repression, safer. So what I'll say to you is that we can go into those things, but I'm also going to say that's also safer. Are you ready to go here? Every time I'm going to be doing that with almost everybody now. If they're not ready, then I'm going to take them back here. I'm going to take them here, but I'm going to explain the limitations of all that while I'm doing it, so that they can, hear the context around the limitations, so they don't just stay stuck there and looking at unlovable self forever. So there we go. And the only thing to say down here, we're probably going to build it out a little bit more, is that there's all kinds of safety and landing that happens in third dimension too. Like sleeper repressions, for example, if there's something that I really don't want to open to, and there's a repression that is a little bit safer than that, then I might hide the sleeper repression. Some people are finding like power and masculinity, femininity are like sleeper repressions, going with anger, for example. But that was a scary one for me. Feminine repression was scarier. Safety taught me to not go there. So even as I was in third dimension work, I was seeking safety around repression work. But I had to go to where it wasn't safe to get that deeper freedom. I'm still in that, by the way. So now let's open it up to any questions or comments. Or if you want to find out where you're at or where you're feeling stuck too.
Can I just add a little bit, Scott, on the right hand side, the green arrows. So there's many kind of skills and practices that we can do to go down into the deeper dimensions. But so if you look at the lines between first and second on the right hand side, identify shadows and trigger to go here, right? So you could be meditating, you could be doing first dimension stuff. What we're suggesting kind of is to start looking at shadows or triggers. So we can go here, meaning go to second dimension to look at to get the deficiency stories or anything, any identity that's deeper. So once you got the deficiency stories or identity up, then bring the emotions online to do it with that, so you can go even deeper to third dimension. I hope that's making sense to people. That's just a kind of example of one of the techniques that you can use to go to the third dimension, using shadows to get to your deficiency stories, second dimension, then use your emotions, or not use them, but to identify and bring them online to come to the third dimension. So I hope that's clear enough. But yeah, thanks.